everybody, Deb Tucker here for another Thursday Tips and Tricks. Have you ever had this happen to you? You need a gift in a hurry? Well, it happened to me just a couple weeks ago, and I thought I would share with you the project that I decided to make. And when I was going about deciding what I wanted to make for this special couple that's getting married here in just a week or so, I thought, I've never made a disappearing 9-patch or a disappearing 4-patch, and I've seen a lot about them, and I thought that would be a perfect time to give it a try. So I went searching online, saw this project, and thought, yes, this is it. This will make a perfect project. And then I started watching the directions, and I realized that I was coming up against something that I know would be a problem for me when I was doing my piecing. They were having me build these half square triangle units with 10-inch squares, and we all have lots of those 10-inch squares, but they were having me put those 10-inch squares together, stitch around those outside edges, and then cut on both diagonals that would, yes indeed, give me pieced squares. But I know, and you know if you watched my video last week, that those pieced squares would have 4 bias edges. All the outside edges would be a bias. And I know from experience that ends up being a problem in the works. So what I've decided to do was make this quilt, and I'm going to call mine Hocus Pocus because it really is pretty amazing how it happens and how the block is built. But I'm going to share with you my directions to create these so that all of your edges are on the straight of the grain, giving you good quality blocks as well as the quick construction. All right, so instead of the 10-inch squares, let's begin this process. We're going to begin with 8.5-inch squares. And you're going to need for each block 2 colored squares that are 8.5 inches and 2 background squares that are 8.5 inches. And all those 4 squares will create one finished block. And then we're going to follow this process. We're going to mark, position, stitch, cut, and then press. And then we'll go on to the next step. But what do I mean by that? This is what I need to be able to create these. I usually work with my lightest square. And when I mark, what I'm talking about are marking stitching lines that are 1/4 inch off the center diagonal. Now you can mark the center diagonal if you want. I usually mark the actual stitching lines by using my quilter's magic wand on there and putting the 2 stitching lines right on the fabrics. Now once I have that marked, I'm going to line up and position both those squares so that all the edges are even. I'm going to stitch on the lines that I've marked. I'm going to cut right down the middle between them, and then you'll see immediately that I've got those half square triangles, and I'm going to give them a press. Now I happen to press them open, but if you'd like, you can press them toward the dark. It doesn't really matter on this one. But what you're going to notice, or you should notice, is that that piece is on the straight of the grain. That means it's going to build quality project instead of just a real quick and down and dirty project. So the squares that I create are actually going to be just a little bit larger than 8 inches by 8 inches. To me, that's not a problem because that allows me to clean these up and create them and make them a very accurate size before I go on to the next steps. And when I go to trim these down, the tool of choice for me is my Tucker Trimmer 3. This is a tool that, if you don't know it, it's loaded with diagonal guidelines so that when you know that you're trimming something to 8 inches, all you need to do is put the 8-inch diagonal along the seam and trim 2 edges, rotate the unit underneath, trim the next 2 edges, and I'm going to have a perfectly sized square to go on to build the rest of the quilt, and not very much waste in the process. So I'm going to trim all 4 of the squares to 8 inches by 8 inches, and then I'm going to stitch the 4 squares together into a very big block. And this right now is going to be 15.5 inches by 15.5 inches. I'm going to place 2 background triangles, kind of nose to nose, and 2 of the color triangles nose to nose. I, again, like to press those seams open, but it really is up to you how you press them. But after I've got them stitched and pressed, the next step is to subcut that square into 9 different units or 9 different patches. And I'm going to do that by making cuts at 2.5 inches measured from the center seam. So I've got a center seam here and I've got a center seam here. I'm going to make cuts on either side. I'm going to measure over 2.5 inches and make a cut on this side. I'm going to measure over 2.5 inches and make a cut on this side. Same thing from the horizontal seam. Measure up 2.5 inches to make a cut. Measure down 2.5 inches to make a cut. And once you've cut those horizontal and vertical lines, what's going to happen is you are going to then have 9 different units that will go on to create this particular block. And here's where the magic happens, because it's just a rotation. What I do to create this block is rotate these units. And I'm going to start with the north and south units, and I'm going to rotate them 180 degrees. So what's on the outside is going to go to the inside. What's on the outside is going to go to the inside. Now, I could sew those together, but that's not what I was shooting for. I'm then going to take and focus on the corner pieces. Those are also going to get rotated. The triangles started in the center, and I'm going to rotate those so that the triangles are now on the outsides. Oh, we're getting closer. And the last thing that I did here, let me orient this so that you can see the darks in the same corners. I could sew this together, but I chose to take that center piece and give it a quarter turn rotation to create this block from those 9 shapes. Wow. Now, there's no saying that you can't stitch this together if you like it better. It would make an equally fine project. But one of the reasons I call this Hocus Pocus is because this is just the tip of the iceberg. Not only can I make those 2 variations with these same pieces, but watch what happens if I come back and rotate those north-south, east and west, the north-south, east and west units back to there. I've got yet a different block. It's pretty amazing. I actually got to playing and I ended up with a bunch of different blocks. I'm going to go off camera here and I'm going to bring them in so you can see. These are just some of the variations that you can get into with those 9 basic building blocks that you created when you did this. But the nice thing is, every single one of these blocks, every single shape has straight of grain on all the edges. So you are building good, sound, solid project with your Hocus Pocus quilts. So you're going to be able to see, we have a link here on the video that you will be able to see these in grayscale. And here's a challenge. How many of you can need a quick quilt? Go ahead and make these up. Take the one block and make it up into a whole quilt and see what it looks like. And if you're loving these fabrics, I couldn't resist using these. This is a collection of fabric that's going to soon be showing up in your local quilt shops. This is my Williams Garden signature collection with Island Batik. I've had more fun with this grouping of fabric, and I can see I'm going to have to start cutting up this bundle to make some more of these blocks. And you should know that if you use fat quarters, each fat quarter will give you a total of 4 blocks, plus a little bit of extra, but 4 8.5-inch squares that will go on to create 2 different blocks for a project. So one big bundle of these will get you a nice big project when you're all said and done. So I hope you've enjoyed this Thursday Tips and Tricks. Come back next week and join us. And please, you get some of these made up, send me some photos. I can't wait to see what you come up with. Take care, everybody. See you next week.